Corrections Director Training resource explaining assessments. Now, assessments have a wide value and a wide range in terms of what takes place in using the IRAS. But the thing I want you to remember is that assessments are typically pre-behavior. They measure these patterns of past behavior, trying to predict what new behavior or future behavior is going to be. Evaluations are post-behavior. So when we're talking about evaluating a client, we talk about looking at what they've already done. When we talk about assessing a client, we look at trying to predict what they're going to do. Now, the way the assessment works is that we take this criminogenic background, we run it through the assessment of an IRAS, and we try and predict future behavior. And the issue is that this becomes a predictive method rather than an evaluative method. So with that in mind, when we're thinking about evaluations, what we're looking at is this process where we assess, then we evaluate, and then we look at making a decision, which is actually the case plan itself. Now, assessments are the process of gathering data, and then we make judgments about that data, and then in the decision making, we actually move to the case planning part. Now, the data we collect in an IRAS is typically, we want it to be quantitative. We want it to be numbers, and that's why we reduce it to a score. Qualitative data would be like the dog is brown. A brown dog, that's qualitative data. Quantitative data, we would say the dog has 4 legs, because what we're looking for, again, is this issue of numbers. And so the assessment, the IRAS assessment, actually reduces it to a quantitative data that can be measured. Now, there's at least 6 types of assessments, but the ones we focus on are the diagnostic, the formative, and the summative. Now, I want to show you how these are actually used when we're actually doing the IRAS. In an IRAS, the first thing we do is we diagnose the client's current state. And what we're looking at is we're looking at past criminogenic needs or behaviors, and we're trying to determine the strengths and the weaknesses using a norm reference criminogenic assessment. In other words, we take a national averages, and this is how typically clients respond according to these national averages. The diagnostic part is done at intake. It's predictive, and it produces a numerical score. That's the quantitative part of it. The important thing is that we have to shift our mental thinking here. Once we have the diagnostic, when we do a case plan, we have to do the formative part of the assessment. Now I'm looking at information and feedback for the case planning process, and it's collaborative. I need to involve the client in this because I'm focusing on goals, I'm focusing on outcomes, and this is where we're developing this roadmap for new behaviors. We're trying to create new behaviors based on our best predictive diagnostic that this client can accomplish new behaviors based on where they're coming from. So in this process, this is where Prochaska's stages of change comes in, and we really need to help the client understand this. And again, in this formative assessment with this type of discussion with our client, we are doing a little bit of diagnosing here. There's a little bit of diagnostic that has to be done with the stages of change, because I need to know how predictive this client can be in terms of the stages of change. When that's all done, I can develop a good case plan, but the case plan is based on the formative assessment using the IRAS, not the diagnostic, not the numbers, but now I'm actually going into the domains and seeing how those apply in each case. At the end of the time the client has with us in community corrections, we re-administer the IRAS, not to diagnose, but as a summative. It's kind of a final exam type thing. See, it's a summative assessment, and I'm trying to measure what kind of learning has been completed. And I measure that against the diagnostic. And again, we're using numbers, then we're measuring predictive versus the summative, and I'm trying to get a better or a lower score to know that the behaviors have changed. When you're thinking about IRAS and assessments, keep in mind that there are three parts to using the IRAS in community corrections. I diagnose first, then I take and I form a case plan, and at the conclusion of that case plan, I measure the sum or the total change, and I try again to measure that in numbers. I'm trying to get a quantitative feel for it. So the IRAS is not just this static tool, it has to be used in three specific ways.